Good day. This is Marcia Elder of onlineinterviewers.com and thevirtualsolutioncenter.com, and we're very pleased to share this interview with you today. It is from a 2006 webcast, but both the subject and the specific content of the interview are very relevant today. And Senator Graham remains a prominent national figure on the matters of this interview. It is rich with timely information, perspective, and inspiration. Senator Graham served as chair of the Select Senate Committee on Intelligence and also as co-chair of the Joint Congressional Committee that investigated the occurrences of 9/11. And you'll hear more about these roles of the senator in just a moment, but several roles since that time also include his having served as chair of the National Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism, or WMD, and he currently serves as chair of the WMD Center, a national 501c3 not-for-profit research organization which continues the work of that commission. Senator Graham also serves as a member of the CIA External Advisory Board, and he is a member of the board of directors of several companies, and also the chair of the board of overseers of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, which is located at the University of Florida. He also is the author of several books, including America, the Owner's Manual, which teaches the skills of civic participation, and Keys to the Kingdom, a novel of suspense which draws upon his background in government and intelligence. And as you saw on the cover slide, he authored the book Intelligence Matters, and that is the primary focus of our interview for today. It was an honor to interview him, and we thank him so much for his continued service to the country. And without delay, we now turn to this important, compelling, and at times chilling discussion with the Honorable Bob Graham.
Good day and welcome. This is Marcia Elder of marciaelder.com. Among our specialties are public speaking, training, and interviewing. And it is a great pleasure in this program to be interviewing a very special guest, a man whose name is synonymous with integrity, leadership, dedication, and vision, the Honorable Bob Graham. The subject is a crucial one to the future of our country, national security and the war on terror. In that regard, as a three-term U.S. Senator, Senator Graham was perhaps best known for his 10 years of service on the Select Committee on Intelligence, including 18 months as chairman of that committee. He was in that role on September 11th, 2001. And he later co-chaired the historic and far-reaching House-Senate joint inquiry into the intelligence community's failures with regard to the unprecedented attacks and tragedy of that date. While serving in these roles, he had access to some of the nation's most closely guarded secrets. Results of the national inquiry, coupled with additional fact-finding at his initiation, compelled Senator Graham to speak out within the Congress and to the American people, as we'll hear today. He advocated reform of the intelligence community through proposed federal legislation which he authored. He also authored the revealing book, Intelligence Matters, an insider's look at America's national security system and failures in the war on terror. He has indeed been a leader in the realm of national security. Among his many other distinctions, he served 2 terms as governor for the state of Florida, where he was a leader on a host of major concerns affecting the public. And as an aside, I was privileged to work in the governor's office at that time. He was recently a senior fellow at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Currently, he is concentrating efforts on establishing the Bob Graham Center for Public Service at his undergraduate alma mater, the University of Florida, which I hope there will be time for him to mention further at the close of this program. So thank you so much for being here, Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Marcia. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about some subjects that are which I feel very passionately, and which I hope will be of interest to your listeners.
Absolutely. And we'll start out with several questions to get a big picture view of the subject, then delve into further detail on key issues and topics. First question. The threat of terrorism is at the forefront of U.S. attention like no other time in history, as you know better than most. You played a pivotal role in the 9/11 investigation and in a close-up look at terrorism. We'll get into more detail, but could you start with a thumbnail sketch of your role and what it was like?
I'd become chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee in June of 2001 when Senator Jim Jeffords, who had been a Republican in a 50-50 divided Senate, switched to become an independent, thus making the Democrats the majority of the Senate, and I moved from being the ranking Democrat to chairman. Then a few weeks later, recognizing the importance of intelligence, I led a group to several places around the world, including Pakistan, which were likely to be centers of U.S. interest in the war on terror. That event caused us to increase our sense of concern. Little did we know that in just a matter of days after our return to Washington, that our city, as well as New York and Pennsylvania, would be attacked by terrorists. I have been very critical of the way in which we've conducted our war on terrorism, primarily because I think we've lost focus. In my judgment, the greatest threat to the United States from terrorists is from those shadowy tribal groups such as Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, which have shown the willingness, the capability, and the presence inside the United States, which are required to effectively attack and kill Americans. I believe that the war in Iraq has diverted our attention away from where the real terrorists are located and have allowed them to reorganize in a more effective and violent form to extend their global reach and to add substantially to their recruits. So the war on terror has been deferred for almost 5 years, but it is still a war that we're going to have to fight, and it will be a much more difficult war in 2007 or 2008 than it was in 2001.
Now, the events of September 11, 5 years past, have brought about many changes in government and corporate policies and procedures and practices, as well as in expectations of the public. Are we doing enough to counter the threat, and how serious of a threat do you now consider it to be?
No, we're not doing enough, both substantively and in terms of the way in which we are approaching the issue from a matter of policy. Substantively, we still have big gaps. One of the most gaping is our seaports and the 20-plus million containers that roll through those seaports every year. We have not significantly increased our level of inspection or our procedures to assure that illicit items are not being brought into the United States through our seaports. Similar comments we made about other major vulnerabilities, such as our chemical plants, our municipal water system, our ground transportation system. The process that we've used to respond to terror in terms of Homeland Security has been rear view mirror. If our adversaries have used a particular technique in the past, we immediately adjust our regulations to try to guard against them doing it in the future. Today, for instance, we're turning in our toothpaste and shaving cream at the airport security counter because there was an incident in which some terrorists in Great Britain were thought to be using those devices to create a bomb aboard airplanes. What we need to be doing is looking with an anticipatory vision through our front window shield at what are the vulnerabilities that we have that would most likely be exploited by a terrorist, and how can we harden those against attack. We've got to make that transition from rear view mirror to front window pane as a critical step towards enhancing our security from terrorist attacks.
Senator, you are one of the few people in the country to have had an intimate look at how the U.S. carries out its national security mission and how prepared we are as a nation to prevent terrorist attacks, to minimize the impacts of any such acts, and to respond in the event of their occurrence. If you were to grade our government on its performance, on a scale of A through F, let's say, how would we rate, in your book, both at the time of 9/11 and again today?
In terms of Homeland Security, I would give us a grade before 9/11 of D, and I would give us a grade today of C to C minus. In terms of our coming to grips with the terrorists that have the greatest will and capability to kill Americans, I would give our grade before 9/11 as F, and our grade today as also F. And part of that is because our adversary is so much stronger today than it was 5 years ago. So we have not made a great deal of progress in the war on terror, and we continue to be highly vulnerable to attack. I don't know of a person who has thoughtfully considered these matters who would not say that the chances of the United States being attacked again at or with greater severity than 9/11 are almost 100%. The only difference of opinion would be whether that's likely within the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. But if you make the time frame a decade, there's virtual unanimity that we will face another 9/11.
That's a chilling analysis, Senator. And going to our next question, you were one of the first to say that September 11th was an avoidable tragedy. If you can say, in general, why did you and the Joint Inquiry conclude that it could have been avoided?
We identified a dozen instances between January of 2000 and September of 2001 when the plot that led to 9/11 could have been identified and destroyed. Just to use one example, one of the earliest examples, in January of 2000, there was a summit of terrorists held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which we knew about in advance and had our CIA charged with overseeing that meeting and learning as much as we could. For inexplicable reasons, the CIA decided not to personally take responsibility for putting a listening device inside the conference room, but rather relied on the Malaysians to do so, and they were unable to do so. Thus, we were denied the chance to hear the very plot which led both to the bombing of the USS Cole, a naval destroyer in the fall of 2000, and then in the fall of 2001, 9/11. The second mistake from the same meeting in Malaysia was that the CIA had collected a number of photographs of the participants, including the photograph of the passport with a multi-entry visa of one of the subsequent hijackers. But the CIA held that information to themselves. They did not share it with the Immigration Service. They didn't share it with the FBI, with any of the domestic organizations that could have used them to exclude those future hijackers from ever gaining entry into the United States, or to have effectively tracked them down once they got here. Those were just a couple of the dozen examples of missed opportunities to have avoided 9/11. In my judgment, there's no question that 9/11 was an avoidable disaster, and that our intelligence agencies have carried a heavy burden for their role in not availing themselves of those opportunities to avoid disaster.
You have authored a very compelling book on this subject by the name of Intelligence Matters, which incidentally is available through the event website. And I have to say, it reads like a gripping, can't put it down novel, but the scary part is to find out that it is real life. We look forward to doing a virtual book tour with you on this book, but for now, if you could summarize for our listeners, what is intelligence in this context, and why does it matter?
Well, the word intelligence has two meanings in the title of this book. First, it means the organized process of gathering clandestine information, analyzing that information, making it available to decision makers who then use it to make informed judgments for the benefit of the people of the United States. The second is intelligence in the IQ sense, that the level of intellect and judgment that the users of that clandestine information apply has great significance to the security of the United States of America. This book is both a discussion of the subject of intelligence, the matters of intelligence, some of its history and its organization, but it also underscores that intelligence makes a difference in our lives today. Better, more creative, more willing to share intelligence in 2000 and the first 9 months of 2001 would have avoided 9/11. The failure of intelligence mattered dramatically to the people of the United States.
In describing the status of the U.S. intelligence community, you noted a couple of years back that America was the last advanced nation to establish an intelligence service, that on 9/11 our system of intelligence was largely unchanged from the 1950s, and that it has been inadequate to confront the new threats that America faces. Do you still believe it to be inadequate? And if so, what has to happen to get the U.S. where we need to be?
We've made some progress. I think the biggest challenge that the intelligence community has is not organizational, although there has been some changes in the organizational relationship which have the potential of being helpful. I think the most important element is human. We've got to get more people into the intelligence agencies who understand the languages and cultures of the regions of the world from which our greatest threats are now emanating. Most of the history of the U.S. intelligence agencies have been the Cold War. They were established in 1947 in response to the fact that the Soviet Union, which had been our World War II ally, was suddenly becoming hostile. And we felt that we did not know enough about the Soviet Union to adequately interpret their capabilities and what they might be planning to do. The intelligence agency during the Cold War became very oriented towards technical means of gathering information, particularly satellites with listening devices and cameras. And the consequence of that was that our human intelligence, the human beings who do the tough work of identifying persons from foreign countries or groups who will be willing to gather information and make it available to us, our ability to exercise that kind of human intelligence diminished substantially. Now we're in an era where technology, while it is still valuable, is relatively less important because the nature of our enemy is different. You could learn a lot about the Soviet submarine force by taking enough pictures of their submarine facilities. You can't learn very much about Osama bin Laden by flying a camera over his cave, even if you knew where his cave was, which we don't. So we've got to put an emphasis on training a future generation of culturally prepared Americans who can do the tough work of human intelligence.
The Pakistani intelligence director, Mahmoud Ahmed, was quoted in your book as saying, quote, "Most people are aware of their past and fantasize about the future, but their primary focus is on the present. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda are different. For them, only the future of paradise after death matters. Any activities of the present are trivial interludes until the ultimate is achieved." Senator, what does this very strong statement mean to the future of national security?
Well, it was the head of the Pakistani intelligence who probably in September of 2001 knew more about Al-Qaeda and the Taliban than any other person on earth, explaining the mentality of our adversary, and ironically explaining it on the very day that we were attacked. What it means is that we've got to understand that mentality and be able to use that understanding as we prepare to defend ourselves and to offensively take on the terrorists where they live. It's a much different mindset than we in the West are used to dealing with. It's also the mindset held by essentially a tribe rather than a nation state, and therefore, as a tribe, it's not constrained by any of the international conventions that apply to national governments. We have a major challenge in unlearning techniques that were good in the past but almost irrelevant today, and relearning the way to respond to a totally different adversary.
You said ironically, and I believe I recall correctly from your book, that he said that shortly before the attacks even occurred.
He was actually speaking those sentiments while we were getting yellow pieces of paper at a breakfast that was held in the House Intelligence Committee offices on the 4th floor of the U.S. Capitol, alerting us to the fact that first one and then the second tower of the World Trade Center had been hit by aircraft.
We tend to think of national security policies and measures within our country. But as you have pointed out, America's interests and presence extend well beyond our own borders. For instance, the U.S. embassies and consulates around the world, and that they make decisions on who enters our country. What special considerations come into play in security measures beyond America's homeland?
Well, the United States has interest and makes decisions on a global basis. the first Americans who were killed by terrorists were the Marines who were in a barracks in Lebanon in 1983 when a Hezbollah suicide bomber drove a truck into that barracks and killed more than 200 soldiers and Marines. Then the next attack, major scale, was in Africa against two of our embassies. Then there was the USS Cole in Yemen, where 17 sailors were killed by a suicide attack. So the United States has vulnerabilities around the world as well as those here at home.
And also beyond our borders are countries with access and potential future access to nuclear technologies and materials that could prove dangerous, if not catastrophic, to other countries around the globe. How can we combat this problem, and how does the theme of intelligence matters apply here?
Well, it applies in the sense of using your judgment to determine what your priorities are. I think the highest priority should be avoiding weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear, falling into the hands of terrorists. And I don't think we've done a very good job about it. During the administration of President Bush, both North Korea, which already had a well-advanced nuclear program, has now gone almost assembly line and has recently tested one of the products of that assembly line. And Iran apparently is getting closer and closer to nuclear capabilities. That says to me that our efforts at restraining the capability to produce nuclear weapons has not been adequate. We also have many places in the world, particularly in the former Soviet Union, where there were substantial warehouses of nuclear materials that are being handled in a very slipshod manner. In the book, I talk about visiting one of those laboratories. In this case, it was not a nuclear laboratory, but a biological laboratory, where the only security for some of the most violent and virulent biochemical weapons was a piece of string around a refrigerator door. Those conditions just accentuate the danger that the world faces of weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of people who are prepared to use them and have demonstrated their facility in using conventional weapons against targets of the West, including the United States. And if they're able to upgrade from TNT to plutonium, the world is at that much greater vulnerability.
Senator, after 9/11, the then CIA director acknowledged before you in the Congressional Joint Inquiry that the government had good reason to either watch list or deny a visa to a key figure in the realm of terror, Nawaz al-Hazmi, yet we did neither. What is the watch list? How could this have happened? And how can we assure that it doesn't happen in the future?
The watch list is maintained by the State Department, and it is a list of people who would be denied entry into the United States. They should not be issued visas by our foreign consulates, and should they get a visa and get to an immigration office at a U.S. port of entry, they should be denied the right to come into the United States. In this case, what happened was that there was ample information to put al-Hazmi and his partner in terrorism on the watch list. They both had attended that session of terrorists in Malaysia, but the CIA failed to provide to any of our domestic security agencies the information that would have put them on a watch list and kept them out of the country.
In Intelligence Matters, you make reference to a range of such failures that led to the extreme consequences of 9/11. If you could point to one or two others that were of particular significance, what would they be?
Well, just to use another example, there were 5 or 6 examples within weeks of 9/11 of where hijackers had been detained by a state or local law enforcement official, mainly in automobile related violations. But because the names of these people had not been made available to local law enforcement, they were unaware, the arresting officer, of how dangerous the people in the car that they just stopped for speeding were. They wrote them a ticket, and the people drove off. In fact, some of those tickets were still in the glove compartment of cars parked at airports in Washington or Portland, Maine, as the hijackers had driven to the airport before getting on the planes that eventually led them to the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, or Pennsylvania.
And to our listeners, you can learn of others through the Senator's landmark book, Intelligence Matters. It is available through the website for this event, and it is without doubt a compelling must-read of extraordinary importance to our future. Turning to our next question, most of the terrorists on the planes on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. Your investigation included observations, discoveries, and documentation concerning the relationship between the U.S. government and the Saudis. What can you say about this, and what do your findings mean in the context of the U.S. approach to national security?
One of the most significant aspects of 9/11 that is yet to be fully explored and made available to the American people is the role of Saudi Arabia. The FBI stated that the White House had told them to pull back from a full investigation of the Saudis, or to allow anyone else to undertake such an investigation. Not only were 15 of the 19 hijackers from Saudi Arabia, not only was Osama bin Laden a Saudi by birth and nationality, not only was Al-Qaeda first founded in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and continued to be predominantly financed from Saudi sources, there also is evidence that the Saudis made available to the terrorists a system that supported them and gave them cover while they were in the United States. The ones we know the most about were those terrorists who lived for a period of time in San Diego, where there was an extensive set of relationships between Saudi agents and the terrorists that facilitated their getting a place to live, a driver's license, flying lessons, financial support, and anonymity while they were going about their planning. Well after 9/11, there was a CIA memo which our investigation uncovered, where the CIA agent said that there was incontrovertible evidence that there is support for these terrorists within the Saudi government. It will be one of the great unanswered questions of the Bush administration as to why it has been so protective of a country that abused us so violently on September the 11th.
Senator, you spoke earlier about the difference in ideology and values of those who have sought harm against our country, basically. And could you address the point of did perhaps a lack of appreciation early on of this difference actually contribute to the inception of Al-Qaeda?
Well, the Al-Qaeda was established in the 1980s by a group of very wealthy Saudi business and commercial people in Jeddah. It was established in order to strengthen the position of extremist elements within Islam, both to resist the secular activities of the Saudi government, as well as to try to push back against the cultural intrusions from the West. Bin Laden did not become a part of Al-Qaeda until the early 1990s, but quickly became identified as its leader and the principal beneficiary of its financial support. So Al-Qaeda is an organization with deep and broad and very financially significant roots in Saudi Arabia. The organization not only continues to exist, but it has been reorganized since 9/11. It used to be a very hierarchical organization where Osama bin Laden made virtually all of the significant decisions. Today, it's much more like a franchise operation where Al-Qaeda is helping local terrorist groups in 60 or more countries, and thus the capability to launch terrorist attacks is much greater today than it was 5 years ago.
In 2004, you said that America's military resources should not have been redirected from Afghanistan to Iraq. Do you still believe that? And now that we're there, what should happen next?
Absolutely. It was probably the greatest strategic failure in modern American history. We had Al-Qaeda enveloped. We knew, as one CIA counterterrorism leader said, we knew bin Laden's zip code. We were that close to detaining him or killing him, and yet at that very moment, the decision was made to begin to shift resources to get ready for a war that would start 15 months into the future in Iraq. A terrible mistake for which we will pay the price for decades to come. What should we do now? We are in Iraq. We can't just walk away. I think we should do the following things. One, we should negotiate with the government of Iraq when it will be, how much time will be required for the Iraqi government to stand up an army and a domestic police force that will be able to take over the security of their country. I don't think that should be an open-ended date for completion. I believe that, like most human beings, the Iraqi government will respond best when there is a deadline. When we are able to begin to remove our troops from Iraq, many of them will not be coming back to the United States. Rather, they will be directed to Afghanistan to finish the 5-year delayed war against the real terrorists who are located there. We also need to get the other countries in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, to stop assisting the insurgents. Saudi Arabia is the principal financier, and second, to recognize the fact that they have a very big stake in avoiding a collapsed Iraq that has just become a total cave for terrorist activities. And finally, the United States, need to start rebuild our international alliances. If there's one thing we've learned in Iraq is that, unlike in 1991, where we scored a great victory, where we had a genuine coalition, that having a coalition of only the willing, and the willing increasingly becoming unwilling and leaving us, is not sufficient to win the war on terror. So we've got to have a strategy of getting out of Iraq and leaving it with some indigenous security capability, get back on the real war on terror in Afghanistan, rally the other nations around Iraq to assist it in avoiding a meltdown, and rebuild our alliances on an international basis to restart the war on terror.
As you well know, the U.S. heavily relies on foreign sources for one of our major energy sources to fuel our country. And Senator, when you were Florida's governor, you played a major leadership role on energy issues and policy, including the advancement of efficiency and alternative energy. Should energy efficiency and alternative energy sources be a part of our strategy as far as our Middle Eastern strategy and America's war on terror?
Well, the answer is it should be an important part of our strategy and should have been for the last 25 or 30 years, without the necessity of waiting until we're attacked by terrorists to bring this point dramatically to our attention. But clearly, the influence of terrorists is increased when the countries upon which they rely for their financial support are gorging themselves in oil-related profits. So it's critical to our long-term national security that we reduce our appetite for petroleum. Now, that's not going to happen quickly, and it's not going to happen easily, and it's going to require a lot of changes in our lifestyle. But that's what national leadership is supposed to do, is to point the way to hard decisions. As President Kennedy said when he challenged us to go to the moon, that he does this not because it is easy, but because it is hard, and it is doing the difficult, hard, heavy lifting tasks that build the character of America. We need to be called upon by this generation of national leaders to do the hard, difficult work of moving our society away from its addiction to petroleum towards greater conservation and alternative means of meeting our energy requirements.
Senator, in the Congress, you championed reforms to U.S. policies governing the security of our country. Have needed reforms adequately been put in place? And if others are still needed, what are the most important?
The most important reforms that still need to be made are, one, to change the orientation of our homeland security from looking at what's happened in the past and then shaping the future as if the past is a perfect guide to that future. We need to be much more creative and anticipatory in understanding our adversary. Number two, we've got to bring more people into the intelligence and the military services who understand the languages and the cultures of the opponents that we are now facing. Number three, we've got to revive our role since the end of World War II, which was as a leader of nations with a common goal and objective, as we did with the creation of NATO, as opposed to the current policy, which is essentially go it alone on the world stage. There are some other changes that we need to make within the intelligence community itself. I think one is, now that we have taken a step at bringing the agencies more closely together, we now need to take the next step, which is to begin to decentralize so that we are organized around missions to be accomplished, such as avoiding the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, rather than functions such as taking pictures or listening to conversations, which is the way in which our intelligence agencies are currently structured.
Kristen Breitsweiser, who co-chaired the Organization of Families Who Lost Loved Ones in 9/11, made several comments that are noted in your book that I'd like to refer to. One spoke of the need for leaders with courage to take responsibility for what went wrong. She said we must investigate the errors so that they will never happen again, and that it is our responsibility as a nation to turn the dark events of September 11 into something from which we can all learn and grow so that we as a nation can look forward to a safe future. Have we adequately learned from the experience? You've commented on this in different parts, but let me put that question to you in that context. And what can you say about the need for leadership and accountability at all levels?
I'm a believer that assuming responsibility at the personal and the organizational level is critical to effective discharge of responsibility. And one of my major criticisms of the current administration is its reluctance to hold anybody accountable for anything. I guess the most dramatic example today is Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld. When historians begin to recount the number of mistakes that he has made as Secretary of Defense, the reader will be astonished that there was no step made for accountability or for the substitution of new leadership. The same thing has been true with the intelligence failures before 9/11. To date, nobody in the FBI or the CIA or other agencies has been sanctioned for clearly unacceptable behavior, which contributed to 3,000 of our fellow citizens losing their lives. I think that is one of the darkest chapters in the Bush administration, is its total abandonment of the concept of personal and organizational responsibility.
Shifting gears for a moment, and before we draw to a close, today's program has been extremely informative, if not very frightening also, but truly a public service and a call to action for the public. And I'd like to mention an organization whose focus is on quality education to inform and empower the public. That is the Florida Public Interest Foundation. I have the great pleasure of chairing that organization, and its services include and go beyond Florida. The foundation is a charitable nonprofit, and it receives funding support from concerned citizens and others who want to see timely and informative programs of this very nature on the environment, population growth and sustainability, on civic involvement and volunteerism, ethics, healthcare, and other topics that affect people's lives. Contributions to this very fine organization are tax deductible, and we have a generous donor willing to match on a one-to-one basis any funds raised through this call, making your donation worth double. So contributions may be made online and by mail, fax, or phone. Just go to www.publicempower.com to find out more. That's public, EMPOWER, empower.com, to show your support. And back to our special guest, Senator Graham, public service has been your focus throughout your distinguished career. And now you're bringing an institution about at a major university that will be focused on public service. Can you give our listeners a summary of what that is and how they can be supportive or find out more?
The Graham Center will be located both at the University of Florida and the University of Miami. It will have the same essential goals at each place. Those goals are, one, to develop the skills, values, and attitudes for effective civic and public service. As an example, beginning in January, the University of Florida will offer an undergraduate certificate for students who complete a set of curriculum requirements that are based on enhancing one's public and civic leadership skills, and also to participate in a set of extracurricular activities such as internships that will increase their experiential knowledge and their personal depth of commitment to public and civic life. A second area will be Homeland Security. Already we are engaged in programs, for instance, in training persons at the state and local level who have an intelligence responsibility at the home front level for protecting our people. We'll be engaged in a number of other initiatives that are designed to enhance the security of America. Third is our north-south relationships. Florida is a state that's very much affected by what happens in Latin America and the Caribbean. We want to develop programs that will enhance that better understanding of our interdependence and make it more mutually beneficial. So those will be our three primary areas of attention. We intend to bring prominent national and international figures to the two campuses to meet with students and share their vision of the future. We will be sponsoring research in the areas of the Americas, Homeland Security, and public leadership. We will have a series of forums at the University of Florida in a building that's now under construction. There will be a place of assembly called the Akora, which is the Timucuan Indian word for assembly, where prominent speakers will be invited to debate, to lay out their ideas, and then be challenged by the students to respond to questions that are of importance to the next generation of American leadership. So those are some of the things that our center will be doing. I appreciate the interest that has been expressed. I would urge that anyone who is interested could contact our office. I am the chairman of the Board of Oversight of the Graham Center, and we can be reached at 305-817-4062. That's 305-817-4062. We would be pleased to answer your questions and provide information.
Well, that is a tremendous initiative, and as a Floridian and American, thank you so much for doing that. And do you have any closing comments that you would like to make on national security?
Well, first, Marcia, let me say I thank you very much for this opportunity, but I also thank you for what you have done for our state, and I remember with great fondness the many adventures that we shared while I had the privilege of being governor of Florida, and I thank you for your educational leadership today.
Thank you.
These are important issues. I think one of the things that America is constantly challenged to do is for each generation to step forward and accept its responsibilities of participatory democracy. In our system of government and our society, if individuals do not accept individual responsibility, there's no one else. There's not a king. There's not a philosopher, God, who will assume that responsibility. If we don't do it, it will either be undone or it will be done with someone who might not share our same values. So participation in our democracy is a critical part of America's future, and I thank you, Marcia, for giving us all an opportunity to understand the forms in which that participation might take.
Thank you so much. And we have covered a lot of territory in this program today. And while there are even more points of importance, our time has drawn to a close. So again, this is Marcia Elder with a 3-part final message. Number 1, go to the website for this event and buy a copy of Intelligence Matters While They Last. This is one of the most important books of the decade. Number 2, go to publicempower.com to show your support for quality programs to inform and empower the public. And number 3, thank you to our listeners for being here, and a very special thanks to Senator Bob Graham for being with us today and for his immense public service to our country. Thank you, Senator.
Great. Thank you very much, Marcia.
And good day.
Good day.